right. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, Debbie. Um, Considering what you know about galactic history, why do you think it's so important right now at this moment for humans to begin to learn about our galactic history?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of people would say that, hey, it's just history. Why do we need to know it? We need to focus more on the here and now. And actually, I think knowing history is important, particularly galactic history, because the truth has been hidden from humanity for thousands of years. So for thousands of years, we were led to believe that we were just these mundane, unintelligent beings, stuck on a planet, that we were just kind of created by a man and, from a man and a woman, referring back to the Adam and Eve story that is so prevalent in Christianity, and that, uh, that we were just kind of not the masters of our own, reality or our own fate, and that what happened on the planet happened, started happening maybe a few thousand years ago, and that was it. That we had this really unremarkable beginning. In actuality, just from the work that I've been doing, and others, I would say other thought leaders in my space have been doing, we're starting to realize more and more that humanity's history is a lot older than we thought it was, and that there have been other sentient beings from other star systems, dimensions, and realities that have been visiting Earth for probably close to 4 million years, starting with the Sirians from the Sirius star system. And then the Andromedans from the Andromeda constellation were also visiting Earth. They were doing some scientific expeditions here. And then from there was also other groups. They say there was at least 22 species of extraterrestrials that have been visiting planet Earth for, I would say, at least several million years. This is even before the times of Atlantis and Lemuria. And they were colonizing Earth, so Earth is kind of unique in the sense that it has the capacity to for diversity, for biodiversity in particular, and also the capacity to contain DNA from many different systems. And so I do love Barbara Marciniak's description that it was created to be a living library. So it was created to be this space where DNA from other systems can kind of commingle with each other in one small planet. So that's what makes it really unique. It's also one of the few planets that can hold lower frequencies. So unlike, say, the planets in the Pleiades, or planets in perhaps Lyra or Sirius, or especially Andromeda and Arcturus. The planets in this particular solar system can hold lower frequencies. But
Mm.
getting back to the history part of it, uh, we've been sold a narrative that is, if not an outright lie, admitted quite a bit of what was really true. And it's my mission, I would say, among other people's mission, to bring the truth forward, to help us realize that, we're not just these dumb humans that evolved from apes, that our genetics are a lot more complex than that, and that we're actually interesting compilation of 22 different humanoid races from many different star systems. And I think we need to know this so that we can prepare for the ascension, so that we can prepare, because Earth is changing, our reality is changing. We're
Mm.
moving from the third dimension to the fifth dimension, and we truly can't become a galactic society unless we truly understand where we came from.
Mm. Exactly that. That is so key. You know, as you were talking, it got me thinking about what I learned, what
Mm,
I learned in school, what I learned when I was
yeah.
heavily invested in science. And it tells you about the evolution of human beings, and you know how that goes. And we split off here, split off there, what have you, and the
Hmm.
missing link and all of this nonsense, right? But
Hmm.
then when you look into the galactic history, what you're seeing is something completely different. Like there's a whole world of things that are happening that were never once mentioned, right? So I'd love to know, like I'd love for you to get into more of your perception when it comes to the evolution or de-evolution, if I must say, of human beings.
Yeah, interesting question. Yeah, um, this is something that I would say fascinated me quite a bit. So I've done quite a few deep dives into this particular topic because it seemed like in the past we had very advanced technologies. I mean,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like, especially with the pyramids in Giza, like, how did they build those things? They didn't just do that with slave labor. Okay.
Exactly.
You know,
Nonsense.
yeah, that was crazy, right? So it's like, oh yeah, they got thousands of slaves to pick up one of these really heavy stones. Yeah, sure. So obviously they were using extraterrestrial technologies, to build these monolithic structures throughout the planet. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Because there's just no way, even today, we don't have the technology to build the pyramids, which is shocking. I mean, we just don't have the machinery to be able to do it. Uh, so I was doing some deep dives into the Akashic records. So for those people that don't know what I do, I am not just a galactic historian, but I'm also an Akashic records channeler. I've been doing Akashic records, readings and channeling, I would say for at least 14 years, uh, it's been quite a journey, because you do get a lot of information, particularly from the Galactic Akashic records. So getting back to your question, so in the beginning, like I said, there was these star people that were, visiting Earth, colonizing it, and so there's different groups that colonize different parts of the planet. And then at some point it was decided, I would say from some of these extraterrestrial groups, let's start some really beautiful civilizations. So let's just try to establish some civilizations that will encompass certain qualities that we want to see develop. And so the first civilization that was developed, that was an actual civilization, was Lemuria. A lot of people don't know about Lemuria unless you're in the spiritual community, but Lemuria was the counterpart to Atlantis. I think a lot of people know about Atlantis, but Lemuria was actually founded 70,000 years ago, which is, blows away, the current mainstream thinking of, oh yeah, the Earth was just a few thousand years, and the dinosaurs came and then they were destroyed, and then we had cave people, crawling out of the caves, so that wasn't really the correct narrative, so that was, I think, purposefully shared amongst our society to make humans feel like we're smaller than we are. Because if we knew that, oh yeah, our genetics come from these very advanced races, we're not going to put up with this slave planet. Okay. We're not going to put up with these slave systems that are in place, so this has been purposefully hidden for thousands of years. So getting to Lemuria, so Lemuria was more of a spiritual civilization. So they were not so much focused on mechanical technology. They were more focused on astral travel, on creating just through intention, developing spiritual aspects, so
Mm.
highly spiritual civilization, very advanced in some ways, maybe not in the ways of technology, because they didn't feel like they needed it. And Lemuria was located in the Pacific Ocean, so it was right where I would say Hawaii and Fiji Islands and Easter Island. It was a big continent at one time. So then Atlantis on the other side, which is the Atlantic Ocean, was also created. So my understanding from the records is that the Arcturians and the Andromedans founded Lemuria, and that the Pleiadians and the Lyrans and the Syrians founded Atlantis. So Lemuria was more the divine feminine civilization. Atlantis was the divine masculine. So technology was a thing, always a big thing with Atlantis, which ultimately led to their downfall. It's a long story. I'm not going to get into it, but the short version is that Atlantis went into to war with Lemuria, destroyed Lemuria. At that point, the fifth dimension, Earth was plunged from the fifth dimension to the third dimension, and then ultimately, due to inner conflicts, Atlantis went into a civil war, and they destroyed themselves. So that's the narrative that I understand to be, my interpretation of what happened. And then at that point, there was a lot of survivors from Atlantis, and so and maybe even some from Lemuria that tried to create a new civilization that was be the compilation of both the masculine and the feminine energies, and that was Egypt. So this is why a lot of us, especially a lot of us light workers and spiritual seekers, we feel so connected to Egypt. That's why we have all these spiritual retreats, in Egypt. So a lot of us are trying to reintegrate those past lives we might have had there. And then I would say after the fall of Egypt, and particularly after the fall of the Roman Empire, that was when the consciousness really went backwards. So back in ancient times, I wouldn't say it was so much prevalent after Egyptian civilization, but it used to be quite common for extraterrestrials to visit Earth. So they were our
Mm.
teachers, they were our mentors and guides, and I would say probably around, I don't know, the time of like maybe 10 AD. So around the beginning of the Middle Ages was when the extraterrestrials realized that the consciousness was just not there anymore, and so they stopped visiting us. So
Mm.
they just kind of felt like, what, we just have to let them get back to a certain level, consciousness level, before we can work with these individuals, on this planet. So we went through, I would say, a great decline during the Middle Ages. So this was a time when, religion, particularly Catholicism, was really pushed, and it was all about control. It was all about, keeping the truth away from, the masses, and only certain people in the higher echelons could have access to truth. And then I would say the Renaissance was when there was more of an upswing, and there was, things slowly started, gradually raising in consciousness, to the point where we are now, where things are really changing rapidly. So that was my abridged version, but I hope it made sense.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Wow. There are just so many
Hmm.
things that when you kind of look at our history and look at where we're coming from, because I remember going to museums, just like I love museums, right? And I would go to museums and I would look at the artifacts and I'm just like, this doesn't make sense. The history that they're telling us, it just don't make sense because what I'm looking at is way more advanced than what we're doing today.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
there
Yeah.
is there is something that happened that no one is talking about, and we're just supposed to just swallow whatever we've been told, because you
Yeah.
see these things and you're like, I don't see any technology today that can replicate this,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When you
And
travel, when you go to museums, when you expose yourself to these things, you kind of begin to see that.
oh, absolutely. And even in, ancient civilizations like, just recently I did a cruise in ancient, in Greece, so it was a Greek Turkish cruise. We visited, certain sacred areas during this cruise, and just the level of artwork blew my mind. I mean, just like
Crazy.
I mean, just the detail in the marble statues. And nowadays we look at art and it just looks, juvenile compared to what people were creating back then. And, these frescoes, they have all these brilliant colors and all this detail. And I'm just thinking, what happened to humanity? I mean,
Right.
like what, now we see this artwork that they're saying is art, and I'm just like, there's no comparison. There's just, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some, really gifted artists out there, but the work that they're doing compared to the ancient times, and that's not even getting into the technological aspect. This is just the art,
Yeah.
So these people were way more advanced than our historians, our mainstream historians like to give them credit for. And there's probably a lot that they were doing back then, that we don't even have access to now. It's just, we live in this highly technological age, but it's kind of like we're baboons with iPhones. We don't really know what we're doing. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just kind of like, it's kind of more of a regression in a sense. But um, and I remember reading an article too about the IQ level of, they were comparing the IQ level of the average Roman citizen as opposed to the IQ level of a person, living in Western civilization today. And these people were way more intelligent. I mean, they read more, they thought about things more, particularly I would say with the Greek philosophers and Pythagoras in ancient Greece, and then there was the Roman writers, that would write all these theories about different things. And so these were people that were pretty intelligent, compared
Yeah.
to people today. Now there's exceptions, I'm not going to try to make it sound like we're all a bunch of dummies, but you look at general society today, and everybody's in this TikTok, uh, it's all about TikTok. And let's just gather information as quickly as we can. We don't even know if it's real. We don't think about it. Nobody reads
Yeah.
anymore. So it's kind of sad in a way, but I do think, the light workers were here to change that. So we are trying to change it from the inside out. We're trying to, and I do think there's a kind of this general, swing from, this fast food society back to, doing things the old ways,
Yeah.
that were actually the best ways. Um, so I think there is a movement, I would say amongst the awakened community, that there was some things that our ancestors were doing that were pretty valid. Okay. I mean, it was
Very.
pretty smart. Yeah. So, but yeah, I do, that just fascinates me a lot because, especially that article about the IQ level, because I was just blown away, because we always have this impression like, oh yeah, people in ancient times were primitive. They didn't have
Yeah.
access to an iPhone or the internet or computers. But in actuality, in a lot of ways, they were just as smart, if not smarter, than humans
Yeah.
today.
They were
Yeah.
very, very intellectually advanced. You can see that
Hmm.
when you begin to expose yourself to ancient history and the artifacts from that, you begin to see how intellectually it's just mind blowing. They were so advanced
Oh,
technologically. And
yeah,
yeah,
gosh.
it's crazy when you begin to see it for yourself. So for me, when I, going down those rabbit holes, being exposed to different cultures and seeing different things, um, yeah, you begin to question everything. You have no choice but to.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us are questioning things now. And so, where did these ancient people learn all these techniques from? That's the next
Right.
question. Like where did they learn this from? And because obviously they didn't come up with it themselves, so they were learning it from extraterrestrial beings. I mean, it was it hasn't been quote unquote proven by, I would say, earth standards, but I would say there's so much evidence out there that there were visitations from beings outside this planet that were just looking at the Sumerian some Sumerian motifs, and all these
Yeah.
winged humans that were depicted, and some of the cave drawings of beings that look like aliens, that are seen throughout the planet, and even in I would say Renaissance art, some of the artwork you see UFOs, in the sky, and it's just like, okay,
Yeah.
where did that come from? That was no just little angelic being. That was actually a UFO they were trying to depict. So there's a lot of evidence out there, even though, people say, well, you haven't been able to prove it yet. But I would say there's enough of us talking about it where, okay, there's something to that, because there's a lot of us out there that are coming to this conclusion, to where it's not just a coincidence. It's not just our imaginations. Like, oh yeah, let me imagine something crazy and try to monetize from it. I don't think it's that. I think a lot of us are trying to share the truth, and or at least trying to get people to think of an alternate to what we've been told.
Yeah. Yeah. When you think about, because there has been a lot of talk about, extraterrestrials or galactic family making contact
Hmm.
nowadays, making a lot of contact.
Hmm.
You know, Earlier you mentioned them withdrawing and
Hmm.
just allowing us to develop however which way we choose to.
Hmm.
So now, why is there this contact, this coming back, this reconnection? Why is this so significant right now?
Yeah. Yeah, that's also a good question, because before, when people would have contact with aliens, it was always an abduction. It was always like, oh, I was taken by some small grays, and they prodded and poked me when I was on the ship, and it was really scary, and then I was just left someplace. So you hear accounts like Travis Walton's accounts, and with the Ring of Fire. I mean, it was just like, so forth and so on. We've heard these accounts for decades, and now all of a sudden the narrative is changing. People are saying, yes, I'm having visitation by extraterrestrial beings, uh, but they're positive interactions, and they're not impeding on my free will. They're not forcing me to go somewhere. I feel a connection with these beings. I feel like they're part of my soul family, or they're part of my star family, or whatever you want to call it. And I think it's because we have finally gotten to the level of consciousness where, as I would say, as a collective, we are able to accept the possibilities that there are extraterrestrial beings beyond this realm. So it took, obviously hundreds, if not thousands of years to get to that point. But now we're at the narrative that, okay, I do believe extraterrestrials are real. I can accept it. I can wrap my mind around it. And so, a lot of us that have souls, so there is a term called starseed that I think there's a lot of starseeds on the planet right now that are ancient souls that their soul originated from other realities, other planets, other systems, other realms. And so there's a lot of us that are starting to remember, we're starting to come to the conclusion that I'm not originally from Earth, at least my soul isn't, maybe my physical body is, but I'm not originally from this planet. And so now we're starting to open ourselves up to contact from these other beings. I'm one of those people. So in 2012, I had an extraordinary experience where I was brought on board an Arcturian starship. And for the first time ever, I went from being totally asleep to being totally awakened in one night, where I was. Uh, I was introduced to my galactic family, and it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. So unlike a lot of accounts like out there that will tell you that, oh yeah, these aliens are scary and they poked and prodded me and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have that kind of experience at all. I felt like an honored guest. I felt, and they shared a lot of what was going on planet Earth, at least to the level where I could understand it at the time. And it was a life changing experience. And I had this visitation not just once, but twice in 2012, which
Mm.
completely changed my life, completely. It changed me from being an unawakened human to finally realizing what was going on behind the matrix, behind the scenes, and start trying to find my place in this ascension process, which took a few years. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, now I know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to, go and do my thing. I had to go through a reawakening process, just like a lot of us do. But I do believe that we are having more of these visitations on Earth because they're preparing us. They're
Yeah.
preparing us for first contact, where everybody's going to know that we have extraterrestrial beings visiting the planet. It's not going to be hidden by the government anymore. It's not going to be, hush hush, top secret. It's going to be where we all know about it. And I do believe this is just around the corner. I know Bashar. He's a famous channeler. He thinks it's going to happen next year. So
Mm.
2027. My account, I was given more of a range. So my range that I received from the Akashic records is that it will likely be between 2028 and 2032. So that's just around the corner, so I would say Bashar and I are pretty close in our assessment of when we think this is going to happen. And I do think we're getting prepared. We're getting prepared to shift into the galactic age, because that's the next, logical evolution for humanity. And I do think there's certain individuals on this planet that are trying to get our technology to that level. Elon Musk, for example, he's crazy. I mean, he's a crazy individual. Okay, I mean, he's out there, but I would say, some of the things that his companies have been working on are pretty extraordinary. I mean, they're trying to get us to the point where, with SpaceX and, all the other inventions, with Tesla cars that run on, electric, energy. I mean, he's at least trying to get us past a point where we're relying on fossil fuels, so there's that, so I think that's why we're having more and more of these visitations, and I can humbly say I'm one of those people. Why me? I don't know, because I'm nobody special. That's what I told my extraterrestrial visitors, that I don't know why you picked me, because I'm just a really dumb human, you know. And they were like, "Oh, you don't realize who you really are," you know. And I'm just like, "Okay," you know. But I'm very honored and grateful for the connection and how it's, I would say, positively impacted my life. You know, I'm living, you know, an amazing life right now because of what happened back in 2012. You know, so I'm just happy to be here and to be of service.
Beautiful. Wow. Amazing. That is so incredible, Debbie. So, when you have, I guess, when you're communicating with the galactics, right?
Hmm.
Whether from Arcturus or anywhere else, what is their perspective on what's happening right now? You know, because yes, they're preparing us for open contact. They're having these open communication experiences with a lot of us now. There's been a lot of talk about it. W- from what you've heard or from the conversations that you've had with them, where do you what do you kind of think they're perceiving right now? What is their perception of what's going on Earth, what we're doing with ourselves, the developments that we've made so far, the state of how we're evolving, I guess?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say in some levels they're proud of us for making it this far with all the obstacles that we've had throughout, you know, the I would say the many centuries or even, you know, thousands of years of suppression. Um, so I would say, you know, for the group of us that are awakened, that we want to make positive change on this planet, I would say they're incredibly proud of us. But at the same time, they realize that we live in this dualistic society, you know, that it's, you know, very much duality consciousness. And that, you know, they really can't impede on the free will of humans. So if humans are going to choose to be part of the ascension process and try to develop a better planet, you know, a new Earth, so to speak, then that's our choosing. If humans choose to stay in the 3D system and they choose to still remain a part of the false matrix that we've all been subjected to for decades, then that's also their choosing as well, you know. So we can't force people to awaken. I think you know, we've been given like this grace period, I would say, since at least 1987. You know, that was the time of the harmonic convergence, and since then we've seen, you know, our consciousness expand exponentially. We've been given this opportunity to get as many people awakened as possible, but there's going to come a time where there's going to be a separation, you know, where not so much like a rapture. I don't want to make it sound like that because, you know, some people buy into this big event, uh, you know, theory, and I just don't buy into that. I do think we will ascend as of our own choosing. So, but we are going to see more of a separation where I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of people part of the matrix that are just dying. I mean, they're
Yeah.
just dying, you know, like a lot of celebrities, they're dying, you know, they're just keeling over dead. There's a lot of our family members who maybe just don't want to awaken, that maybe disappear from our lives, you know, not overnight, you know, it's not like something scary, but maybe we have less contact with them, or maybe, you know, we just don't, you know, see them that much, or, you know, they kind of, they're doing their thing and we're doing our thing. So it's kind of like this attrition period, which sounds scarier than what it is, but it's because our frequency no longer aligns with the mainstream frequency that is
Yeah.
part of the current matrix. And so we're over here living our 4D and 5D lives, you know, having a great time, you know, you know, just being open to the wonders of the universe. And then everybody else is living this really strange narrative of wars and conflicts and false flag events and a lot of scary stuff going on. And we can consciously choose not to consent and not to be a part of it. I do
Hmm.
believe that. And I think for those of us that are the pioneers of this new movement, I do think the extraterrestrials are very, very proud of us because we've taken on a very, very difficult mission and we've chosen it from our own free will. And they know how difficult it is. They know all the obstacles that we have, even currently have, in our reality, where we have friends and family tell us we're crazy. Or for instance, my husband and I were the only ones that decided not to get vaccinated in both of our families. And the rest of our families were telling us that we were crazy, that we were never going to be able to travel, we are never going to be able to do anything. And we're just like, no, we stand by our decision. We're not getting vaccinated. And now, that the more of the truth is coming out about the pandemic, we're glad we stood by our decision, because I do think it was part of a big eugenics program, because I have seen many accounts of people that I know that either have died from taking the vaccines or have created, have succumbed to really bad health problems because of it. My sister being one of them, so we do see this, played out even now. And, so it's just up to us to make that decision. And in a way, ascension is a very collective thing, but it's also a very individual choice, so it is an individual choice. So, we can choose to be a part of this movement of, because the earth frequencies have been rising for quite a while,
Yeah.
so we're getting more aligned, we're getting more aligned with where the planet is right now, as opposed to where the rest of the humanity is choosing to stay at. And my hope is that more and more people will awaken, which I think they are. I think we're seeing, gradually, even amongst mainstream, they're talking about topics now that even a few years ago would have been taboo.
Yeah.
So we are seeing this shift and change, even on the broader scale.
Mm. Yeah. How do you think that how do you think that we as humans can begin to think of our role in the cosmos now, given this new context?
Mm, what do you mean exactly? Like,
Because, earlier in the conversation when we were talking, we were mentioning how we have been taught that we're just these lesser beings that was created by something that is much more intelligent, some higher being. And we've been taught that we are this lowly, you know what I mean?
oh
Even
yeah,
the
yeah.
religion tells us that we have to beg and plead for salvation. And, we've been taught that, our happiness and the life that we should be looking forward to is on the other side. It's not here. There
Mhm.
has been so much dumbing down of the human intellect. There has been so much um, suppression in so many ways. And then we've been subjugated in so many ways to a lot of the things that they have programmed into us as human beings. So, given this new information, knowing that we are not lesser, that we are equals, and, of our potential, when you talk about people having communication with galactic beings, channeling, doing all these things, when you talk about the type of DNA that's inside of us, when, referring back to the beings that were here before in the times of Atlantis, Lemuria, or even earlier than that, and how much actually went into the creation of human beings. When you kind of put all of this history into context, what do you say, or how should we then look at ourselves or begin to perceive ourselves? What do you have to say to what we've thought of ourselves before versus how we should be thinking of ourselves and positioning ourselves right now?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. So I would say humans were always meant, particularly Earth humans, were always meant to have 12-strand DNA. So we're always meant to be have gifts and abilities that we currently don't have now. That was maybe due to genetic manipulation in the past, particularly by the Anunnaki beings from Sirius C that wanted to use Earth humans as a slave race to mine gold. We've all heard that story before, and so they did some damage. Now there were other extraterrestrial geneticists that were trying to upgrade our DNA. Particularly the Syrians from Sirius A and B, and also the Pleiadians and other groups were, inserting enough of their own DNA in the human genome so that we did have the capacity for ascension. So we had the capacity, for intelligence, for our own free will, and to be able to ascend. So but they had to allow us to get to that point, which took thousands of years. It took a long time.
Mm.
But comparing what we were taught, like we were, you mentioned, like we were taught. I was raised Roman Catholic, and it was like, as a human, you're a sinner. They always paint us as a sinner. You're just a bad person. You're a sinner. Only by the grace of God, only if you beg and plead for forgiveness will you be able to ascend into the higher realms, which is actually a falsehood. So they always want to keep us separated from source, but in actuality, we're all source. We're all soul shards of source. We're all God. We're all part of this, greater collective of source energy. So we all have these abilities within ourselves to create the realities that we want to create for ourselves and for the planet. So I think what we're seeing now is humans, a lot of us, starting to realize that, what, I'm a much greater being. They're becoming more empowered. Like, I'm a much greater being than I was taught. By the education system, or by my religion, or by my parents, or my society. I have abilities that can be developed. We're all psychic. A lot of my Akashic students will come in. They'll say, "I don't know if I can do this. I'm not psychic." And I said, "Of course you're psychic. We're all psychic. We all have these abilities. They've just been suppressed. So our third eyes have been calcified, or we've been subjected to a lot of toxicity in our environment. So I think a lot of us are at least starting to realize that also that, what, I might have an older history than I originally thought. It's kind of interesting. I'm just going to use this as an example. So, for a long time in the spiritual community, at least in my field, which I do a lot of Akashic records channeling and readings, people would always say we only have access to the earth records, for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, one of the teachers that I base my practice on, Dr. Linda Howe. She's considered to be like the mother of the Akashic records readings. The modern Akashic records readings. An amazing woman by all means. She would often say there are no galactic records. There's just Earth records, and I was just like, oh hell no,
Mm.
no. I mean, sorry, Linda, I love you, but I disagree. Earth is just a small blip in human consciousness. Okay, the experiences we're having here on Earth is just a small part of our soul story.
Yeah.
And I've done enough readings. I've done thousands of Akashic readings throughout the years, and I've been able to see that a lot of us have souls that are much older than we originally thought. And what kind of amazing civilizations did we have prior incarnations on? And I say prior loosely because honestly, in the higher realms, there is no linear time. It's maybe simultaneous to our experience here. That's really the real way how time works in the higher dimensions. Um, but then we start to realize that, oh, wow, I have these gifts that I didn't even realize I have, or I have these abilities, or this is why my personality is the way it is because I came from this star system, or I went through this history at a certain period of time. And this influenced, my soul development at some level. So it gives us a more broader perspective of who we are as humans and as galactic beings, and it's bringing us to the realization that we are part of something greater, something beautiful, and embracing it, rather than being afraid of it. So yeah, beautiful question though, and I appreciate the backstory on that. So it kind of helped me
Definitely. Thank
formulate my
you.
answer. So, uh, but thank you so much. And yeah, I totally agree with you with some of the Christian, gosh, the Christian dogma
It's
about oh,
crazy.
we're just these little beings, and oh, we got to beg Jesus for forgiveness because in actuality, in the higher realms, yes, we can do negative things, and things are perceived as negative, but it's an experience. I mean, do we want to go out there and be the next serial killer? No, probably not, because there's going to be karmic repercussions. I mean, obviously, but it's not like the be all end all like Christianity makes it out to be. Like, oh, once you do something, you're damned for eternity, and you're going to be looking at, a permanent spot in hell or Hades. I always thought that was hilarious. I always thought the whole concept of Hades or hell was hilarious. It was just like we're living in hell in a way right now, being part of
Right.
the matrix, so even back when I was, studying the Bible, before I was awakened, I could never wrap my mind around this whole heaven and hell thing. It's just like, so who gets to choose? Like, you go to the pearly gates and St. Peter's there and he's saying, okay, you did some good things, but you did more bad things. So I think you're going to go to hell. It just seems ludicrous, but
Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, that was a reality we were grown up in. So it was
Yeah.
kind
I
of
think we've
interesting.
done I think we've done a really good job at creating our own hell here.
Yeah, we sure have. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that was by design. I do think maybe on some level we've
Yeah.
chosen it to learn some lessons. People hate to hear that every time I tell them, "Oh, you just created your own suffering." They hate it when I tell them that
Yeah.
because
It's true
because
though.
a lot of people want to stay in victim mode, and poor me, I didn't choose this. And I said, yes, you did. You're maybe on a higher level, you did, but you chose it for a reason, for your own soul development.
Yeah.
And we make contracts with individuals, maybe family members or spouses or people that come into our lives that are very difficult that we have to deal with. And you know we chose that for a reason, so that
Mhm.
we could learn how to do things differently and move on and not be contracted to that outcome anymore.
Mm.
So yeah, my clients always hate to hear that though. Well,
It's
at least some
true
of them.
though.
Yeah, it is. I do think we have a lot more power and a lot more choice than we've been taught to believe, with the reality that we've you
Yeah,
know
you said something earlier too. I always say that we have all forgotten that even the state of affairs in the world right now, we've forgotten how much we've also, been involved in that, participated in that. And it's easy to sit at home and complain about what these power structures are doing and what these politicians are doing and stuff like that. But we have we I think we a lot of us have not yet had the awareness of how much we've participated in that and helped to create things as they are, as we see it, the systems and all of that. Because you said something earlier, it's we've given consent, consent through compliance, right? Through
Right.
complying to a lot of what's happening. So although you're not like getting your hands dirty and in the mud, your compliance is a very, very powerful thing. Very, very powerful thing.
Yeah, you didn't stand against it, so it just perpetuated and just kept happening. So yeah, it's a beautiful statement you made about compliance because we always have the capacity of saying I do not consent. I do not consent to this reality. I do not consent to what's happening on the planet. I don't want to be a part of it. And then we also need to take action to on our own in our own way, to create a different reality. And that's where I think people become very disempowered because they think, oh, it's just one. I'm just one small person. What can I do?
Right.
I'm not a politician. I'm not, a major celebrity or, somebody that's, has any kind of power. But in actuality, we do have power. Even in doing small acts of kindness, even in maybe, taking on our own spiritual missions. It doesn't have to be super fancy. It doesn't have to be on a broad scale, but everything that we do as awakened beings shifts the frequency of this planet. And it does have this ripple effect, So that's why I keep doing what I do. It's just a very small part of the greater whole, but, I'm just trying to awaken people, to our true history and also to our origins, that a lot of us didn't originate from this planet, and that we are uh, rediscovering ourselves, despite this veil of forgetfulness that we've been plunged into with the third dimension, that a lot of us have forgotten our past lives. We don't know who we are, and then we go through this period of self-discovery, it's actually a rediscovery, because on a higher level we've always known who we are, so but yeah, it is kind of crazy how in a way, you said it so beautifully that we did comply on some level, that, and I think that's why we see this kind of soft disclosure in a lot of these Hollywood movies. Like they have to tell us what they're doing, but with us not opposing it, we're kind of giving them our consent. It's kind of like, okay, this is what we're doing. And then we're saying, oh, that's kind of an interesting little fiction story, and then we forget about it. And but in a way, we've given our consent, So the most powerful thing we can do as humans is to establish our self sovereignty, as
Yeah.
you know, as galactic citizens and as divine children of the universe, that we don't have to comply with something just because it's what everyone else is doing and, it's expected. And, you know,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. I remember in our previous conversation, when I told you that my business name, I called it Arcturus, right? It's
hmm
registered in Arcturus. And when you're talking about, like how many of us are here with origins from all sorts of places in the galaxies and in other galaxies, and people awakening to that. I think that is something like that for me to even like
yeah, like why did
be
you pick our,
drawn to do
yeah, why did you
something
pick
like that,
Arcturus? Like
right?
why that star system opposed to many other star
To
systems?
many, right?
Yeah.
It's not coincidence. It's not
hmm
coincidence. So it's just to give people that insight that whatever your natural inclination is, that
hmm
nudge that you get, just follow it because taking you somewhere. A remembrance is coming through. Something is awakening inside of you because these things, they're not coincidence. They're not happening by accident. And as you said, like a lot of people, we have these lineages, we still have the DNA embedded, we still have that light inside of us. And it's just for us to recognize that and tap into that. So that was just a
Yeah.
beautiful reminder.
Yeah, it's and I get a lot of people that tell me, "How do I know my star system, or how do I know where I'm from?" And I say, "You are." Most of them already know. On some deep level, they already know. Um, and so, I always recommend, meditate. Maybe really go deep inside yourself. Listen to your higher guides. They You already know it because I guarantee you almost 80% or 90% of the time I do a reading, I'll tell somebody, yes, you're from this star system or you've been in this star system. And they say, oh my God, I knew that. Like, oh, I had that feeling. Or I, I kept hearing, Andromeda, let's use Andromeda for Andromeda in my head. And I didn't know if because we were taught to second guess ourselves, and
Yeah.
it's like, you already know it. We all have the ability to access to higher realms, so and I kind of always laugh too that we're not just one star system, we're ancient beings, we've been in a lot of star systems. I mean,
Yes,
yeah,
that
like maybe
too.
yeah, I always get people that just want me to give them that one place, like, yes, you're from Pleiades and that's your place. And it's like, no, your history's a lot more complex than that. You were in Lyra, and then you were in this system, and then you went to the Pleiades, and then maybe you went somewhere afterwards, and then you came to Earth. So it's more of a complex story, and because we're all unique souls, we've all had our own unique experiences, and
Right.
what a beautiful tapestry that is. This beautiful tapestry of all these beautiful places we've been to, we've experienced, and now we get to be here in another beautiful place, which is planet Earth. So
Mm.
even with all its, you know, uh, the its duality consciousness and its craziness, and it's kind of like PhD level planet, like 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 okay, we think you're ready for Earth. It's going to be a little harder than some of the other places you've been at, including Orion, which Orion was really bad. Okay, Orion was bad, but be prepared because Earth is going to be even more difficult. And if you can pass Earth, you can do anything. Okay, I mean,
Oh man. Oh
yeah,
man. So we're
yeah,
really soldiers then.
yeah. We're just no, we're students. We're kind of like galactic students. Like, okay, I'm taking on Earth. Okay, let me see what I can learn here. Because where else are we going to learn duality consciousness? I mean, it's so so that's why I kind of laugh when people say, "Oh, I never chose to be here," or "I never chose all these bad experiences I've had," and I say, "Yeah, you did. You totally chose it." I chose the bad experiences I've had, even though some of them were pretty bad.
Yeah.
But I also learned a lot from them. So and would I want to repeat them? No, but I've learned a lot, and I'm grateful for what I learned. So that
Yeah.
there's that too.
Absolutely. When I'm really curious about what was one of the most surprising things for you when you were starting to like awaken to all of these things. What was one of the most surprising things for you?
I would say initially it was the realization that I wasn't just an earth soul, how I always thought, that I, um, I just thought I was just a regular human being, having a regular human life, with all its pitfalls and foibles and, you know, ups and downs, so mostly downs, yeah, it was mostly downs. I hate to say it, but yeah, it was. I didn't have an easy life, by any means. But then realizing that. not just that I was an Arcturian soul, but also that I was the master of my own destiny, that I didn't have to continue to have these bad experiences, that I could create the kind of life that I really wanted to have. And it wasn't an easy task. It wasn't because like all of us, I was heavily programmed. I'm kind of a late boomer. I don't know if you would call me Gen X or boomer because I'm kind of in that in between zone between those two generations. But
Yeah.
I was heavily programmed, as a child, that, I didn't have any power, that I had to, if I was to make it in life, I would have to get a job, pay my taxes, pay my bills, get married, have a family, do all the things. Um, and in actuality, that wasn't really real, that a lot of these things that we were taught aren't really real, that we can choose the kind of lives that we want to have, that we have more power than we realize. So I would say the empowerment part of it was the thing that was most surprising to me. And that, because I lived my life, most of my life in fear. And after I had that experience with the extraterrestrials, I let go of my fear. There was nothing to be afraid of, and I live my life that way now, where there's still some things that just like there's still the human aspects of me. Like I wouldn't walk down a dark street at night, in the middle of I don't know downtown Brooklyn. I mean, I won't do that. I
Yeah.
mean, there's certain things that, are a healthy fear, let's say, that are designed to keep us safe. Uh, but as far as everything else, I don't have much fear around it anymore. And, I'm grateful for that because, it helped me to overcome years of depression and anxiety, that I used to experience quite a lot, before my awakening. So this is kind of life changing realizations for a lot of us, not just me, but for a lot of us, that we're starting to take our power back and we're starting to take more responsibility for what we want to create for ourselves and also for the planet.
Mm. Debbie, thank you so much. This
Thank
was
you for
such a blessing. Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you for having me on and for asking such great questions. Damn, girl, you're good. Yeah, so you are good. You're good. You are rocking
Thank
it.
you.
So, no, when I saw your podcast, I was like, oh, I like this girl's energy. I got to go on her podcast, because I turned down a lot of them. Okay. So, um,
Thank you.
but I just had a feeling it was going to be a good one. So thank you for having me on. And I really appreciate the time together.
Thank you so much, Debbie. This has been such a blessing. I'm truly honored that you took the time to have a conversation with me. We'll end by you telling us where we can find your work. I know you have a YouTube. I've seen the videos. They're amazing.
Oh, thank you.
So yes, you can
My
tell us where
videos
we can
does
reach
a good
you.
job. They do a good job. No, I do okay too. But they make me look good. Yeah. So just to kind of share with your audience, I do have a website. That's probably the best way to really get introduced to me and my work. I'm also been a frequent guest on Gaia TV. So if you have a Gaia TV subscription, look me up. You'll see me a lot on Open Minds and Beyond Belief. Particularly those two shows. But my website is debbiesolaris.com. So just like the name you see down there in all lowercase, debbiesolaris.com. I do quite a few in-person events, so I'm a frequent speaker at many conferences, and I'm just starting to get my feet wet into doing more retreats. So I was just told as of yesterday that I am going to be one of the hosts for a Gaia in Greece retreat that is going to be an 8-day yacht tour of the Greek islands. I'm very honored that they chose me to be because my genetics is actually from the Mediterranean. So I'm really honored to be a part of that. And
Wow.
it looks like there might be an Egypt tour as well in December. So, so check
Amazing.
out the events page if you're wanting to check out some of the things. And I also offer a lot of trainings. So we are currently registering for our Galactic Akashic reading course, which is going to be starting in late August. And that's a 6-week course. So if you want to learn to do what I do, which is a blast. Okay. We have a lot of fun in our cohorts. We get great groups of people together. We have a community. It's fun. You get to learn from each other as well as from me. Do check that out. And also, I have littler trainings and less expensive trainings as well on my training page. So, and I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, as you mentioned. So there you go. That's how you can find me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.